the one thing that was really the hanging chad from season one that doesn't fit in with the DCU is Justice League. You know, people often say that, you know, Peacemaker 1 was DCEU, but it doesn't make a lot of sense because there's a lot of other stuff in there that Green Arrow and, you know, Batmite and all this stuff.
Beatty here, welcome back to the channel, and in this video we are talking about Peacemaker Season 2, Episode 1. It's finally here, it's out in the world, and now it's time to have a spoiler-filled chat, review, recap, and breakdown of it all. In this video, you will hear my thoughts on the episode, you will hear my Easter eggs that I caught, you will hear some exclusive insights from people directly involved with this episode. And I'm very excited about that. This is separate from the Morning After Pod, Phase Heroes Peacemaker podcast, which will release new episodes every Friday, and we'll have one available on Friday morning with special guest James Gunn, Max Lord himself. You can hear Jenna and I's thoughts and a full, long, half-hour discussion about the episodes that will be available on all major podcast platforms. And then if you want to hear the interview, you can watch that on the channel or on social, or you can listen to that in the same episode on all major podcast platforms. So thank you so much if you do listen to that. Thank you in advance for subscribing to the channel. We are closing in on 100,000 subscribers. Maybe we get there in the next 8 weeks with Peacemaker content. I love this show. I love this episode, and it's time to jump in. First of all, the thing I have to compliment immediately is the narrative direction that this show is going in. I was not expecting this alternate dimension thing that we got teased in the trailer with Peacemaker vs. Peacemaker to be a story of Peacemaker seeing his life in a happily ever after scenario. This sort of grass is always greener situation to the max, literally seeing yourself in a happy situation where your dad is not a terrible person, where your brother has not been killed by you as a child when you were forced to do terrible things because of your terrible dad. I think that this is a really interesting narrative direction, and I think emotionally it's going to be very interesting to see what comes out of Chris Smith, what John Cena is able to do with this character going forward, and I also think that's going to be very strongly complemented by Harcourt's journey. Jen Holland got ripped for this role this time around, I think. She looks phenomenal. She's in great shape to play this badass character of Harcourt, but also the scene where she goes to the bar and gets her ass beat by a bunch of bikers and basically invites them and invites that fight and wanted to get her ass kicked just so she could feel something after being diagnosed with toxic masculinity is a really interesting storyline, and I think Peacemaker and Harcourt are going to really mirror each other throughout this season, and that's going to be really fun to watch, I think. I think the 11th Street kids are all in a tough position with Rick Flag seemingly ascending in Argus and on a path to finding out that Peacemaker killed his son, which is going to put Economist directly in trouble. Adebayo is still dealing with the aftermath of exposing Amanda Waller and everything from Task Force X, which is a direct reference to the Suicide Squad. And I really like how this episode didn't hold back or wait on having that Peacemaker versus Peacemaker fight. And not only that, it had an ending. Peacemaker from the alternate dimension is gone. That boy is dead. He's cooked. He got impaled by a chandelier. That's insane. So my questions at the end of this episode are, is Peacemaker going to be tempted to go live in that universe? Or is that universe going to find out and come after the one we've been following? That's kind of the biggest thing I think the cliffhanger of this episode left me wondering. But we got to start at the beginning of this episode before we get into all the Easter eggs. The previously on the DC Universe bit where James Gunn has now replaced the Justice League cast and the dialogue from Season 1 of Peacemaker to make the canon make sense, I love that. I think that was really clever. I've been a canon snob about all of this, and to, instead of having the Flash and Aquaman and Superman and all the characters that showed up at the end of Peacemaker Season 1 be Mr. Terrific, Supergirl, Superman, Hawkgirl, and Guy Gardner is just brilliant. I think that works so well, and I'm so glad they did it that way. I think that was really clever, and I did not see it coming. I talked to James Gunn about filming that, and this is what he had to say.
The one thing that was really the hanging chad from Season 1 that doesn't fit in with the DCU is Justice League. You know, people often say that, you know, Peacemaker 1 was DCEU, but it doesn't make a lot of sense because there's a lot of other stuff in there that Green Arrow and, you know, Batmite and all this stuff. But it definitely, the one thing that really stood out was the Justice League appearance. And so, yeah, I had to do something about it. And I handled it in the most simple way I possibly could. That wasn't too expensive.
So does that mean, did you have Millie and David on that shoot?
No, I used plates. I mean, nobody was in the shot. I used plates of everybody. So okay. I reshot, you know, we used plates from the first season. I shot, Guy and Hawkgirl by themselves.
Okay, yeah.
And so it was just a bunch of magic.
I think there's a really good subtle moment at the beginning of the episode where Peacemaker tries to talk to that alien and doesn't get a response, and it just perfectly represents Peacemaker's desire for connection and attention and interaction, and he doesn't get it, and it triggers him, and he's not good at social interaction or just allowing himself to be vulnerable and kind, and that right there exemplifies it, and that to me is where the season's going. The opening dance number has a new song. It's super fun. It's Oh Lord by Foxy Shazam, and I'm curious how that's going to factor into the rest of the season, because if you go back to season 1, Wigwam's Do You Want to Taste It? The lyrics to that say, poison to your mind, devil in disguise. If that doesn't perfectly encapsulate where the season went with the whole butterfly thing, I don't know what does. So this song by Foxy Shazam seems to really just show about overcoming hard times and being more about personal connection, which, again, I think is going to be the theme of this season. I think it's going to get really crazy and insane in the final episodes, but I think at its core, it's always going to be about human connection and overcoming those hard times. Maybe by the end of the season, we'll be able to look back and say, oh, that's why he chose that song more specifically, but I definitely think there's a direct reference to the humanity of season 2. Now, cut to the Justice Gang audition for Peacemaker. You have Hawkgirl, Max Lord, and Guy Gardner there. This is in a Crank Toys toy shop. It's abandoned, but that is a direct reference to Cosmo Crank, the toy maker, major character from DC Comics with lots of ties to different characters. And Jaina Hudson is the character who comes walking out. That's a character directly tied to Batman in comics. Clearly, the universe is fully built out. And I talked to Sean Gunn about those moments on set, filming that sequence and making the jokes about Jaina Hudson and going one-on-one with Peacemaker. And we had an interesting conversation about that Crank Toys Justice Gang audition scene.
There's always a couple of things that are on the fly, but when you work with James, most of the improv is his improv. You know what I mean? So like we're working on set and he's behind the monitor and he throws us lines that we're not familiar with to play around with, or sometimes it's new ideas he's having, sometimes it's part of a, he's a maniac, and so he has like a B script of alternate lines that he prepares before he comes on set. So sometimes it's like other lines that he's written beforehand that we don't know about. Sometimes it's things he's thinking about in the moment, but it's rarely us. Sometimes it is. Like we can throw things out there, and if it works, we'll use it. But for the most part, we're just kind of like, we're sticking to the script and then doing what he throws at us.
That full interview, that full conversation with Sean Gunn is going to be on the Morning After Pod, Phase Heroes Peacemaker podcast. It'll be on this channel and all major podcast platforms. I hope you'll check it out and enjoy. There is a direct reference to Superman when Sacha Bordeaux and Rick Flag are talking. This is set 3 months after the event of Superman, but that whole Luthor incident is a direct reference to the pocket dimension becoming a big rift through Metropolis and almost destroying the world, which is why now they have their eyes on Peacemaker. Sacha Bordeaux, by the way, Sol Rodriguez is playing that part. That is a character directly tied to Batman, like very, very directly tied to Batman. I asked her if she wants to be a part of it, be a part of Batman stories, and she certainly does. This is what she had to say.
You guys are getting me hyped because I really hope it happens one day. Just reading the scripts as many times as I could, trying to learn as much as I could. Being with him on set and letting him direct me is the best I did, and I hope people like it. So I honor her from the comics, but I also brought my own thing and did what I felt was right.
Bordeaux isn't the only tie to Batman. Obviously, we had the reference to 3 metahumans escaping from Belle Reve and Arkham. Arkham is in Gotham City. Gotham City had a street sign, a highway sign in Superman. So we're getting a lot of Batman lore before we get Batman. And that's leading a lot of people to go, oh, is Batman showing up in the end of Peacemaker Season 2? I don't know. I think there's a lot of things that are being kept secret about Peacemaker Season 2. That's possible. But for the Batman debut, I don't know if this is where that's going to happen. I think that might be a little early. I think they're going to keep planting those seeds, and we'll see more Gotham references, more Batman connections before we see Batman himself. And it would just be kind of crazy if Batman debuted on HBO Max, right? But who knows? James Gunn doesn't follow the traditional rules you'd expect, and I always appreciate that about him. So the episode kind of concludes with this trip to the alternate dimension where Peacemaker sees happily ever after, and I love this. Robert Patrick's Augie is not a terrible person as he was in Season 1 of Peacemaker. He still uses language, like he calls one world the Munchkin dimension, which seems to be a derogatory way to describe it. And that shows that I think he's not like this terrible monster racist person, but he's still insensitive in some ways. And I appreciate that there's a moment of vulnerability between David Denman's Keith and John Cena's Chris Smith, because you can only imagine what that moment would mean to Chris Smith, having killed Keith in his universe and living with that and making it sort of the thing that defines him. And him not allowing that to define him in this world would be amazing. And the Peacemaker in this world didn't shoot our Peacemaker right away. He thinks a little bit more cautiously and with a little bit more consideration, I think. And that was a big moment of juxtaposition right there when he pulled the gun on Peacemaker, and ultimately that Peacemaker got killed for it. Our Peacemaker maybe didn't mean to kill him, but did. But I think that the moment of vulnerability between David's, Keith, and John's, Chris, was beautiful. And I actually asked David about that as well, and this is what he had to say.
Look, I got 2 boys that are 4 and 7, and I tell them every day how much I love them, and I'm constantly affectionate with them, and I allow them, to be emotional and be vulnerable. It's so important that I believe that men have, all the different emotions that you're allowed to have. Someone may consider more, a different point in time, maybe being emotional and vulnerable and crying is gonna be more feminine or whatever. I tell my kids, no. That's all within your masculinity. Like, you get to own all of those feelings and all those emotions, and you should share them and be celebrated for them. My father was a very emotional man. He cried all the time, and he gave me the gift to know that it's okay to be vulnerable. And I mean, if I weren't able to access my emotions, I wouldn't have the career that I have today. And I tell my kids that every day, like, it's okay. This is all part of who we are.
So we're left here at the end of this episode with Peacemaker holding dead Peacemaker. He watched himself die, and as Jenna pointed out to me on the podcast, he has now killed every member of his family, including himself. Killed his dad, killed his brother, and now he's killed an alternate dimension version of himself. That's heavy. So I think this season is now going to see Peacemaker wrestle with that, wrestle with who he wants to be, who he can be, what he can do, who he can connect with, and all of those things. And to me, that's very exciting. I think there's going to be great action. I think there's going to be a lot of alternate dimension stuff, a lot of big DC Universe moments, but I think the big thing is going to be exploring these characters, which is exactly why I think I connected with this show the first season. The Diebeard stuff with Economos was so funny and mean throughout the first season, but it ended up paying off in such an emotional way. And then you had the Justice League cameo as a little, here's a big moment for the DC fans who want to see the connectivity and see the other characters. We just got that already with the Justice Gang showing up in this, and this season has potential to do huge stories and set up something like Crisis with these alternate dimensions, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think it's I love the intrigue of the alternate dimensions, but I think Cena's heel turn in WWE is a perfect way to talk about this. Like, that whole story was driven by him feeling like he wasn't connecting with the fans weren't loving him back, and it turned him into the bad guy. Ultimately in WWE it didn't work, and they had to turn him into the good guy again. But I think Peacemaker is going through that same thing, and maybe John Cena's heel turn in WWE was inspired by that. He has people around him who love him and want to connect with him, but he's not good at letting them in. I think the Adebayo stuff is great. Danielle Brooks and John Cena are so fantastic together, but I think you're going to see Peacemaker realize how to accept being loved and being a good person in this season, instead of going off the rails as John Cena's heel turn, tried to do with Cena the wrestler. Overall, time to give it a 10 score. I'm giving Peacemaker Season 2, Episode 1 an 8.9 out of 10. That's a pretty good score. I really like this episode a lot. I think the musical choices are great. I think the music regularly foreshadows what's about to come next in the very scene it's playing in. I think that the reward for watching Superman is really nice and not entirely required. But for those of us who watch Superman 4 times like me, you're getting a treat in the references to the Luthor incident. You're getting, sort of all that connectivity. And I really love how James navigated what is DCU canon and what isn't from previous seasons. And obviously there's some stuff that's unresolved, but he sends the message clearly in this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Please listen to the Morning After Pod Phase Heroes Peacemaker podcast. On audio, you will hear Jenna and I yapping about these episodes in pretty great detail before listening to the interview with Sean Gunn and whatever guest follows. There's some exciting stuff coming. And on video, you will be able to see Sean Gunn and I having a full, long conversation about that Max Lord scene and just Creature Commandos and everything else he's been a part of that's exciting to me. And I think if I'm excited, you guys might be excited. So thank you so much, guys. And I will see you in the next video. If you don't mind subscribing so you don't miss it, it would go a long way. And I'm hoping to hit 100K. See you in the next one.